Nicola Sturgeon has fallen short of an absolute majority, but her party posted a record vote share and she will have enough support to pass a bill on another independence referendum. She won't, she said, let Westminster stand in her way.
They won't be placing themselves in opposition to the SNP. They will be standing in direct opposition to the will of the Scottish people.
The question then, will Downing Street try to block her? On the programme tonight. How could a referendum battle in the courts shape up? A better day for Labour, but Keir Starmer sacks his party chair, Angela Rayner, and Manchester City made to wait for the Premier League title.
This is ITV News with Tom Bradby in Edinburgh.
Good evening from Edinburgh on a day when Nicola Sturgeon is celebrating victory, although perhaps not quite the one she hoped for. The SNP has won 64 seats, leaving it just one short of a majority at Holyrood. But it has secured a historic fourth term in office, and crucially their success, combined with that of the Green Party, means there will be a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. That, the First Minister said this evening, is proof holding another referendum is the will of the country. Should Downing Street try to block it, she said, it would show the UK is no longer a partnership of equals or indeed a voluntary union, and that could be the most powerful argument of all for independence. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith has all the details.
The SNP has fallen short of a majority, just. But Nicola Sturgeon's party has won this election with a record high vote share, and propped up by the Greens, the Scottish Parliament does have a majority for a second independence referendum. The SNP leader immediately promised Scots they will get that vote, and she dared the Prime Minister to stop her.
There is simply no democratic justification whatsoever for Boris Johnson or indeed for anyone else seeking to block the right of the people of Scotland to choose our own future. And let me be very clear about this. If the Tories make such an attempt, they won't be placing themselves in opposition to the SNP. They will be standing in direct opposition to the will of the Scottish people.
To get an independence referendum, the Scottish Parliament will first vote for it, then the First Minister will write to the Prime Minister requesting the powers to give Scots that democratic choice. Tonight, Boris Johnson has written his own letter to Nicola Sturgeon, inviting her to a summit, notably with this line: "We will all have our own perspectives and ideas, and we will not always agree, but I am confident that by learning from each other, we will be able to build back better in the interests of the people we serve."
Well, our message to everyone, including Nicola Sturgeon, is that now's not the time to be having another divisive referendum, another bout of constitutional wrangling.
Nicola Sturgeon's now relying on the Greens, and their leader told me today he will prop up her government, and he does back her strategy for a referendum.
The longer they simply say to the people of Scotland, you're not allowed to choose your own future, the more they will be pushing the people of Scotland in the direction of insisting on independence.
If the Prime Minister says no, will you support Nicola Sturgeon to go ahead and dare him to stop you in the courts?
Scotland's future should be decided by the people of Scotland, not by Boris Johnson. And I think it's entirely legitimate to put the question of Scotland's future before the people again in a referendum.
After 14 years in government, the Scottish electoral map is once again dominated by the SNP. A victory for Nicola Sturgeon that means the independence question is now hanging over this nation. Peter Smith, ITV News, Glasgow.
There will, no doubt, be much political sparring between now and a second referendum, if indeed there is one. Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP must decide carefully how to play their hand. As our UK editor Paul Brand reports, one tactic could be to try and gather international support for their cause and put more pressure on Westminster.
At the markets in Edinburgh, today voters were focused on other choices. But how will those in power now resolve this nation's biggest decision.
Hello.
Today, this MSP was meeting his new constituents, with no doubts that their choice was to have a referendum on independence.
There's still a chance that the losing parties are gracious, admit that they've lost, call on us, the parties that have won, to deliver what it is that we were elected to do, and get on with it.
But at the moment there's no sign of that, though. So what are you going to do if Boris Johnson
I'm going to try and get the message over to Boris Johnson and other decision makers in London that this is literally saying it does not matter what you say, it does not matter how you vote, we will disregard what you are in favour of democratically. And that, frankly, is the end of the United Kingdom as we know it.
The legal route to a referendum would normally be a Section 30 order granted by Westminster. But Boris Johnson says he won't issue one, so the Scottish Government wants to pass its own law authorising a vote. But that could be challenged in the Supreme Court.
Do you think this could all end in some kind of constitutional conundrum?
I think that's definitely a possibility. I do think there has been a preference in the past for political solutions rather than legal solutions to these problems, but it could certainly end up in the courts.
Whatever the constitutional complications, there'll be no rush to a referendum. Nicola Sturgeon has said the pandemic is the priority for now. That also allows her time to build her case, which I understand would involve lobbying other European governments to gather international as well as domestic pressure.
But at home, Scotland, as ever, is split.
Do you think it would be fair for Boris Johnson to say, no, you can't have one?
I think it would be fair for Boris to say that, definitely. It's a distraction and there's far too many more important things to deal with.
Boris Johnson don't have to say anything. It's like the people who decide, not him.
But for now, the two governments face gridlock over who has the mandate beyond this border. Paul Brand, ITV News, Edinburgh.
Well, let's put some of that to Peter, who joins us from Glasgow. Peter, what do you think, in essence, Nicola Sturgeon's strategy is likely to be?
Well, this pro-independence majority gives her her mandate. Now it's about biding her time. She's not going to rush into this, as Paul has just said, for a number of reasons. First of all, she could lose it. She doesn't want to lose this referendum. She wants to strike when she believes she can win. Similarly, Boris Johnson's not in a rush because it is on a knife edge. So, after steering the country through the pandemic, when she believes she has convinced people about the case, that's when she will be asking for the permission to have the referendum or challenging the UK government to stop her in the courts. But what we have to do is look at this election result quite carefully. 48% of the vote for the SNP in the constituencies is astonishing. I mean, 64 out of 73 seats, if we convert that into a Westminster election, that'd be one party taking more than 550 seats out of the 650 available. They would be having to ask the opposition to shuffle up in the opposition benches just for there to be room there. But if we look at that level of dominance, if this was a kind of referendum on whether we should have a referendum, 48% is still not a majority. So while Scotland as a nation has a majority of pro-independence MSPs in the Parliament, the country is split down the middle, and Nicola Sturgeon has a job to convince the other half that their future would be best served as an independent nation.
OK, Peter, discussion to be continued, but for now, thank you very much. And if you've been watching our coverage this week, you'll have heard from our election experts, indeed any time in the last 5 years for that matter, and I'm delighted to say that Jane Green joins me again tonight, Professor Jane Green of the British Election Study. Jane, thank you very much for being here once again on this Saturday night. We talked last night about what Nicola Sturgeon needed to do to win over enough people to get over the line. Yeah. Can we just focus on the undecided voters? A, how many of them are there actually in this? And secondly, if Boris Johnson does block, what does that do to them, do you think?
Yeah, Peter was talking about the divisive nature of the vote and how it's kind of pretty evenly spread. But you have to remember that the voters who voted this week in Scotland represent not all of the electors in Scotland. So turnout in these Scottish Parliament elections was 63%. So a third of potential voters aren't as mobilised on this constitutional question such that they're going to vote in these Scottish Parliament elections where the stakes are really high and were obviously about independence, whether or not the independence referendum would happen. Now, turnout was higher than that in the last independence referendum. It was 85%. And so there's a gap there. There's those people who could be turning out to vote in an independence referendum, but haven't been mobilised to vote this week. And that's pretty consistent with a Scottish election study that shows that around 10% of Scots are still undecided on the constitutional question. And so those are the voters that both sides are going to now be focusing on. And honestly, it's hard to see denying another independence referendum vote as playing well with that 10% of the Scottish electorate.
OK, let's see, Jane. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's just put all that to Robert in London. Robert, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Is it conceivable, do you think, for the Prime Minister to really hold this line that he's going to just refuse to have another referendum?
Well, he's not really saying that, Tom, as we discussed last night. He's saying now is not the time. And given that Nicola Sturgeon is not planning to have that vote till the end of 2023, which means that the legislation would go to the Scottish Parliament at the end of 2022 or beginning of 2023, which would sort of be the crunch moment, because that is broadly when the British government would have to decide whether to challenge that in the Supreme Court, whether to block it. There's a long time to go between now and that crunch moment. Now, in the interim, I've been talking to members of Boris Johnson's cabinet. What they tell me is that Boris Johnson is planning to effectively love bomb Scotland. He's going to throw goodies at Scotland, and he's also going to spend a lot of time playing up what he thinks are the strengths of the Union. And in fact, he's already started that tonight by inviting Nicola Sturgeon and indeed the First Ministers of Wales and Wales and Northern Ireland to join him to talk about shared challenges. The other side of his strategy will be to talk repeatedly about the potential costs to Scotland of leaving the UK. Now, I was very struck by one thing that Paul Brand said, which was that he thinks the Scottish Government may start lobbying foreign governments for support. That strikes me as being a very dangerous strategy. I cannot see EU leaders interfering in what is effectively a UK issue, because of course there are separatist tendencies all over Europe. They wouldn't want to see the UK government interfering in their countries. And I think it is that EU question which is going to prove very hard for Nicola Sturgeon, because she thinks she can win a referendum by promising to take Scotland back into the EU. And I think she's going to struggle to make that case very persuasively. So a lot to play for.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, after yesterday's disastrous set of results, today looked like it was going to turn out pretty well for Labour. They retained power in Wales and with some key mayoral contests. All that, though, is being overshadowed tonight by the sacking of Angela Rayner as party chair, something causing great upset to Labour's left, to put it mildly, as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
Keir Starmer's decision to sack his deputy Angela Rayner from her job as party chair and election coordinator has overshadowed today's gains for Labour and infuriated many on the left.
He said he would bear the full responsibility, and if throwing the working class female under the bus is taking full responsibility, then that quite frankly beggars belief.
But Rayner can't be sacked from her job as deputy leader, and it's understood she will also be offered another role. Yet the party is now in search of at least a new chair.
Is that something you would be interested in? Would you take it if asked?
I've not been offered any job. And to be honest, I don't think your viewers will care one bit what job I've got. They will care about their jobs. They will care about, our recovery from this pandemic. And if we're lucky, they'll care about what the Labour Party has to say and they'll give us a hearing.
In some places they already are. Today Labour had secured half the seats in the Welsh Senedd.
I think this was at the top end of our expectations, but as the campaign went on and the enthusiasm that we saw on the doorstep for Labour candidates in every part of Wales, I don't think it was beyond what we could have expected.
In Greater Manchester and Liverpool City regions, Labour mayors were returned. Andy Burnham with a landslide.
Where the government gets it right and treats us fairly, I will work with them. But where they don't, I will challenge them for you as forcefully as I can. Greater Manchester expects nothing less.
And although the West Midlands stuck by Conservative Andy Street.
And remember, we've got the support of a government and a Prime Minister who firmly believe in levelling up.
In Cambridge and Peterborough and the west of England, Labour even took mayoralties from the Conservatives. Yet all of this will be overshadowed by the decision of the Labour leader to sack his popular deputy from her elections role, the recriminations that follow, and concern amongst other Labour frontbenchers that they too could soon be reshuffled.
And Carl joins me from Westminster now. Carl, why has Angela Rayner been sacked?
Well, look, this has all the hallmarks of a reshuffle gone wrong, because the Labour leadership clearly hadn't even agreed what her new role was going to be before news broke that she'd been moved on from her role overseeing the elections. And that puts Keir Starmer in a difficult position because, of course, the day after you've been accused of failing to understand your northern working class voters, for your response to be to sack your most popular, most high profile northern working class woman is, well, it's an unfortunate look to say the least. I think the reason she's been moved on is because many people feel that in Hartlepool particularly it was a disastrous result for the Labour Party. Keir Starmer hasn't denied that he's been thinking about a reshuffle on the back of that result. There are all sorts of rumours flying around tonight about who might be moved where, but it's clearly not quite the reshuffle that Keir Starmer was planning to have, at least not in the way that he was planning to have it.
OK, Carl, thank you very much indeed. And there is more on all the election results and the events of the last few days on the latest edition of our Calling Peston podcast, which is available right now. Some shocking scenes in Afghanistan now, where children are among more than 40 people who have been killed in a bomb attack near a school. Most of the victims are believed to be female students aged between 11 and 15. At least 50 people were also injured in the explosion, which happened in a Shia majority neighbourhood in West Kabul. Back here, and Kent police appear to be making significant progress in their investigation into the murder of PCSO Julia James. Last night, officers arrested a man in his 20s from the Canterbury area, and today they have been searching a property in Aylsham, a few miles from where the 53-year-old was killed last week. Disruption on the rail network caused by cracks found in high-speed trains could last into next week. A number of Hitachi 800 trains were removed from lines today for precautionary checks. Great Western Railway and London North Eastern Railway are advising people not to travel on Sunday whilst trains remain out of service. Finally tonight, there was a dress rehearsal for the Champions League final today, with silverware on the line too. Winner Manchester City would be Premier League champions. But for the second time in 2 matches, Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea came out on top. Pep Guardiola must be hoping it's third time lucky in Istanbul.
Tuchel's the name, 2 wins against City, and they're getting sick of the sight of him. He'll try to make it 3 in the Champions League final in 3 weeks, but City only had themselves to blame here. They led through Sterling and had a golden opportunity to wrap up the title.
In the end, Raheem Sterling.
Aguero thought it should have been his goal and had the chance to set the record straight when City won a penalty.
Jesus, similar. Oh, it's a penalty. It is a penalty.
It could have won the game and the title, but Aguero was casual and made a hash of it.
Oh dear. Oh.
The boss was not impressed. Chelsea, who'd recently beaten City in the FA Cup semi-final, made the most of the let-off and rifled in an equaliser. City's title celebration put on hold, although they felt hard done by. Sterling thought he should have had a penalty, and Guardiola's mood was not improving. But it got worse. The team, who are rapidly becoming a thorn in their side, popped the party balloons with a stoppage time winning goal from Marcus Alonso.
Thomas Tuchel has done it against Manchester City again.
City must wait for their title. Chris Scudder, ITV News.
And that is all we have time for here in Scotland, where events could ultimately shape the future of the United Kingdom. It looks to be an interesting few months and years ahead. We'll cover every dot and comma of it. Good night.